Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to this, our final big picture panel discussion of the day, the ebb and flow of economies. It's great to see you all here. Of course, as you know, protectionism is on the rise, tariffs are being used increasingly as political weapons, and security concerns are hitting Arctic economies first and hardest. For the Arctic's open, resource-based communities, the choice they face is now stark. Adapt, diversify, take control of investment decisions and opportunities, or simply be swept along by forces that are far beyond their borders. In this session, we will be looking at how global economic tides collide with local realities, from US tariffs and geopolitical friction, of course, over Greenland, to persistent myths around Chinese investment in the Arctic. Today, long-term resilience depends on diversification, but also on innovation and on strategic adaptation. And in addition to all this, it depends on attracting the right kind of investment. Fisheries, mining, forestry, tourism, all of these matter, but are Arctic states moving fast enough? And if stability is the key to investment, as it always is, who is responsible for creating it? Which brings us to some crucial questions. How do Arctic states stay open to capital and innovation without weakening environmental protection, without weakening the defense and security infrastructure? Is environmental policy being compromised, sometimes for short-term economic gain, or perhaps often? Finally, how do we ensure that investments benefit local and indigenous communities, not just regional capitals and external actors? And of course, how do you include the vibrant youth of this region? They are willing and ready to take part, to have a real input in what goes on. But are they being given a chance? So we will explore all of these questions. I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists, our first set of panelists, Miki Jensen, who is Director of Innovation South Greenland, Joanna Kuntonen-Vantriet, Corporate Affairs at Anglo-American Finland, and last but not least, Professor Whitney Lackenbauer, one of Canada's foremost experts on Arctic history. And it's really wonderful to have you all with us for this session. Thank you so much. Miki Jensen, let's start with Greenland, of course. Yeah. With the recent surge in all of the global attention that we've been talking about, are you seeing this translate into real, on-the-ground economic opportunities, and how?
Yeah, there's really been a lot of attention on Greenland recently. And there's also been a lot of attention towards our region. I'm from the South Greenland. I call it the tropical part of Greenland. It's on the same latitude as Oslo, it's Stockholm and Anchorage. So yeah, there's been a lot of interest, and what we see is new kinds of investments coming in. We have one active mine in my region. It's a gold mine, but there's also a lot of interest in rare earths and other types of minerals. And that's a new kind of business for us, because we do a lot of traditional businesses like tourism, we do fishing, we do hunting, and the art in all of this is to try to get some local benefits out of multinational companies coming in to our community.
How can this interest turn into a catalyst for innovation, which is very much your focus in business? Does it risk creating boundaries and barriers?
One of the things that we are working on in our company, I work in Innovation South Greenland, which is a regional business development company. We try to do cross-sector collaborations, like we take a local fisherman and try to link it maybe to the mining industry, maybe to the tourism industry, so they can both still do their fishing, but maybe do some guiding or some transportation or provide food for a mining camp. So that's one of the initiatives that we are working on in our region.
I need to ask you this quickly before moving on. How do you regard the United States' renewed interest and focus on Greenland? In your view, is it about primarily security, national security, or economics, or a mix of both.
Yeah.
And how do people in Greenland actually see this?
I think the last month have been very tiring. It's exhausting, waking up every morning to see the news that something has been said from the White House. And I think it's the new. I'm not a fan of it, but it's a new kind of political communication. There is that everything that is being said not has to be taken literally, but it has to be taken very seriously. And that the end goal often is between the lines. The truth is often between the lines. So that's something. But I think also, as us as a country, we have to admit that we have something in our landmass that is something for other countries' security. We have the minerals to help the world to a more green transition in the world, and that is something that we have to be fully aware of.
And we hear foreign investors often talk about Greenland's resources. What are they ultimately really after?
The ultimate?
What are they after? You know, investors, people who really want to have more input or more of a say in what goes on economically in Greenland. Is it national security? Again, you tied it together with security, you know, the natural resources, but what is the prime
the easy answer is economy. It's on the paper. It looks like a very great business because we have all kinds of minerals in our backyard, and that's the easy answer. But Greenland is also very remote. We have a big landmass, only 56,000 inhabitants, and we're spread all over 63 settlements all over the country. So if you want to do anything in Greenland, you have to build the infrastructure yourself. And one of the things that we focus on in our company is that, like, if you open a mine, the job, okay, they say we'll get some jobs, but jobs doesn't grow resilience. But ownership, it doesn't have to be financially ownership, but it could be political ownership, and skills are the things that are building resilience.
And of course, some of this potential will take time. I mean, there's the extraction involved as well in these natural resources. It's not an overnight thing, is it? Professor Lackenbauer, I know how extensively you've researched the Arctic. And when we look at the economies of the region right now, it's interesting to note that the Arctic accounts today for a very small share of the world economy, less than 1%. But we keep being reminded that commercial activity is increasing every single year. At the same time, there was recent research by the World Maritime University that suggests that Arctic economic potential is being overstated, overhyped. Do you see it that way?
Oh, good question. I mean, to first of all touch on the question that was posed to Mickey, I mean, I think with the United States, it really is a question. Do we see this as realism, as people talk about in international affairs, that's driving the interests? I think it's more real estateism. I think there's something else at play here, and being able to situate the opportunity space, but also situate the threats that we're dealing with is really important, getting it right. So in terms of overinflated, I think in this room, we're all converts. In English, we like to say we've all drank the Kool-Aid, right? We're typically boosters, we're promoters of diversified Arctic economies. That's going to look different in different parts of the Arctic, but we believe in this. So from our standpoint, I'm not sure that it's overinflated. It's that some of the persistent challenges that many of you are dealing with in a direct way on a day-to-day basis are still here. The challenges, tyranny of distance, time, dark. Everybody talks about the cold. We need to remind Trump with his penguin and his meme the other day, maybe he's got the wrong poll together, right? But there are these ideas. When we talk climate change, we do see disruptions going on that represent an existential threat to humanity, yes. But over what time horizons? So in essence, when we look at this flow and ebb equation that's animating this panel, we're in a period of flow in terms of interest. For many of us, we're going to see that as a window of opportunity. You want to seize that before the tide flows out. The danger I see is that we might get baited into overplaying our hands, getting caught up in narratives that on the one hand, we recognize are not representative of the region or the part of the region that we live in that we're touting. And long term, I worry that if we're not mindful, if we're not sharpening our pencils, doing the deliberate work to align the opportunity space with what we know is real opportunities, when that tide flows out, we either get caught in the undertow and sucked way out, or at least we find ourselves with some barren seabed that we're dealing with. So I think right now it's going to be hard for many of us who are such tireless promoters to also take that long-term view to say, yes, we want to seize a window of opportunity. This is the Arctic's moment. But historically, there have been Arctic moments. It's having that long-term vision to see that moment regularized, actualized, and actually see it reap its yield. So is there opportunity? Yes. My view, you probably can't overinflate the Arctic unless you start overinflating specific points, like there are Chinese and Russian ships all over Greenland. I don't know what they're doing on the shores, but those kind of messages, or suggesting that you have to take dramatic action right now in 2026, or else some potential imagined hypothetical maybe future is going to scare you, and you need. So there's a lot at play right now.
And there's a lot of spin to it. And it's good that we're here with you, with scientists and researchers, to be able to sift between what is fiction and what is real. You talked about Chinese warships, and you're swarming around Greenland. Yes, we heard that before, but we've also heard a lot about Chinese investments in and around Greenland and in the Arctic in general. You've conducted a study on this recently. Just tell us how extensive you would say Chinese investment in the region is, and why is it constantly being looked at as a major strategic concern?
I think it's definitely a global concern. So again, recognizing, respecting, most of us are capitalists in this room, or social democrats, but you're still capitalists, right? We look to a future where competition, or look to a present where competition is a natural state of affairs. So when I look at that, it should not shock us that China is interested in Arctic resources or potential access to imagined potential shipping routes in many cases, like the Northwest Passage, right? But that recognizing in those senses, China has indicated that it would like to have more access to the region, would like to acquire more resources. Over the last 10 years, however, has it been able to realize that vision? I would say in the 7 like-minded Arctic states, so Russia is separate in this case, right? Largely, what has been perceived to be pernicious or potentially dangerous Chinese direct investment has been managed. Either those bids or attempts have been scuttled because there were more attractive options, or in some cases we've had national security provisions invoked of national investment review, mechanisms. So work I did with some colleagues through the Belfer Center, the Harvard Arctic Initiative, Anders Edström is here, and Gudborg Rike Hochsdotter, looked at actual state of Chinese investments and said there's a lot more smoke than there is fire.
How much more?
And I say that, but I don't want you to all say, my gosh, he's saying there's nothing to worry about. Oh, absolutely. Competition is the natural state of affairs. We're dealing with competitors. We need to outcompete, and the tactics are changing. So I'm saying now we got to go and follow the money. It's not going to be direct investment, Chinese-owned or Chinese-controlled companies. It's going to be equity ownerships, or ownerships in particular actors in friendly countries who potentially have Chinese backers under the threshold that would invoke a national security review, right? But gives you a controlling interest on a board and allows you to control value chains. It means that we often get hyped up that the Chinese are going to extract all our critical mineral resources. They're interested in continuing to dominate the global value chain. It may be they actually deny us opportunities to act on having diversified economies and create economic opportunities for local peoples if that's their desire as rights holders. So I think when we look at this, it's now being very attuned to things are changing. There are security risks attendant to Chinese investment and other forms of foreign investment. We just need to be very deliberate and not get comfortable or complacent, because my report is suggesting on this one level, maybe we shouldn't be terrified, but we must remain vigilant, we must remain aware, and we need to make sure that we're properly situating and scaling those security risks.
Just slow down for us for a minute. slow down for a second. Slow down for a second. Yeah, I mean, again, out of all the investment we hear that the Chinese, they're buying up Greenland, they're buying up the entire region. True or false?
Mickey, you can tell us. You just said. Is there any Chinese investment in Greenland controlling mining interests at present?
Okay.
Nothing.
So again, to the point, it's being overhyped, is it? I mean, this, investment threat by the Chinese is being exaggerated? Yes or no?
It is in the 7 like-minded Arctic states. So, and again, threats. Threats are imagined, right? Threat equals capability plus intent plus opportunity. In this particular case, I would say capability to make major investments, yes. But China is not an Arctic state, and your Arctic state carries no rights with it beyond that of every state in the world in areas of common heritage of humankind. So from that standpoint, the opportunities are now being denied by the 7 like-minded Arctic states who have the sovereignty and sovereign rights to deny it. So it becomes the question of intent. China would desire something, it must be invited. So I think what we've seen is a pivot in many of our countries. Swedes certainly know this directly, Norwegians, from wolf warrior tactics, coercive diplomacies, towards trying to woo and again find other ways in to be welcomed in. And in that sense, I expect that should be a pattern that we recognize is going to happen, because in competition in the world we live in, right, we should expect that they're going to have interest in the Arctic, especially if we are touting the Arctic's bountiful resources and its strategic importance.
And competition is usually good. It's a good thing.
It can be good, it can be bad.
Depends on the player, I suppose. But this whole narrative around Chinese investment seems to have been driven more by anxiety, strategic anxiety in many ways, than by economic reality, if I understand you correctly. But moving on to another aspect of how investments are being made, Joanna, I know that you've been working in the mining industry for, 25 years now. How much has it changed over the last few years?
Well, I mean, it has changed a lot, I think, in terms of expectations. So just as a personal caveat, I started off in the coal mines in South Africa 25 years ago. I was the first environmentalist ever on that mine and the first woman on that mine as well in terms of middle management. And I spent my first half year justifying my existence. And when you come to today, absolutely, if you don't get the social environmental issues right, you don't have a mine, you don't have a project. So it's been a 360-degree shift in terms of expectations. But for us as a Anglo-American, okay, we have nothing to do with America, despite that it's being in the name. So we're actually a South African-based company that's over 100 years old. So we have actually, and most of our assets at the moment, operating assets, are in the global south. Our investors are mainly in European, Northern Hemisphere, UK, Americas, etc. And our markets are mainly in the east, right? So China is a big customer of ours, right? So we work in that sort of across the geopolitical fault lines all the time and always have. But we have a long-term vision. We obviously have to move along with where the world is going. So at the moment, our sort of focus at the moment strategically is copper, high-grade iron ore, and crop nutrients, so fertilizers. That's what we see is absolutely needed for society and the energy transition going forward. So we need to move, but as a global we're a global company, but our assets are absolutely local, and they're based, and they have the impact at the local communities.
So 2 questions. Tell us about the input of local communities when it comes to the mining industry and how their concerns are being listened to, because obviously we always hear that mining projects are good for national growth and they meet global demand in many ways, but do they actually deliver for the communities living right next to them? That's one. And on a sort of more geopolitical front, how have the current uncertainties, both in geopolitics but also in the global economy, affected how your company and other mining companies might operate in the Arctic?
So, I mean, if we start with the first one, so we have it could be called a catchphrase, but our purpose is to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. It sounds fancy, but the reality is that we really do believe that mining can be a catalyst for socioeconomic development in the regions. And it's part of our sustainability strategy. We have a very strong focus on socioeconomic development in the regions where we operate. If it's done right, right? So you have to make sure you make sure that you have sort of the endorsement of the local communities, collaboration, partnership. You bring them along in defining what is right for that region. What do we need in terms of skills? What do we need in terms of livelihoods? What do we need in terms of education? And define that together. But so that absolutely is a fundamental part of what we do and how we develop our minds and operate our minds.
But I guess on a practical level, how do you move from these sort of statements, which are reassuring, beyond the promises that are often made and the permits, to a place where these companies like yours, can minimize the harm that is done to nature, to the environment, while still operating profitably?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fine balance, and I'm sure that, you know, companies at the end of the day have to put their profits above all else, don't they?
Yes, but I mean, like I said, if you don't get the social environmental things right, you don't have a mine, you don't have a project these days. It's an absolutely fundamental requirement. So I think it starts off with, in the Arctic, actually anywhere in the world where you operate, you need to understand the operating context, you need to understand the environment and the social, you know, aspects of that region. It starts with science. We do years of studies before we even start, you know, in terms of developing the mine, and they need to develop the mine in a way that minimizes impacts. And as mining industry, we do have a legacy, right? It's no denying that. But going forward, making sure that the mines that we develop and operate are done responsibly. So I mean, we look at minimizing impact from the very beginning. So the one project we do have in the Arctic, which is in Finnish Lapland, it's been from the very beginning, we look at how do we develop it in a way that minimizes impact. So underground mining, processing far away from the sensitive areas, net positive impact commitments, making sure that the water is looked after, and again, making sure that the benefit and the value stays in the local community as far as possible.
So an emphasis on local communities, in addition, obviously, to profits, which are, of course, your number one aim and goal. Miki Jensen, how do you see this playing out in your area, in Greenland? Because I know you've said that the most important investments aren't measured in billions, but in local jobs and local ownership.
Yeah.
How does that translate?
That's a very important point to have there. In my region, we are very pro-mining, very positive around mining. As I said, we have one gold mine. There will be probably 2 more mines within the next 5 to 10 years. And we are quite positive about that kind of development. But we are also in a state, in my municipality, we are struggling financially. We are struggling with both lack of money in the municipality, but also in the lack of skills. Like everywhere else in the world, people want to live in the capital or in big cities. So a lot of our skilled, educated people move to bigger places, and we need skills, and we need skilled people to develop if we have to take a local responsibility for some of the businesses that are in the regions.
How does Greenland...
Can I just add to that? I think that's a really important point. I mean, one of the things that is important is developing that local talent. And I think what's great about mining is it actually has really highly skilled jobs. So if you look at a mine, we'll have anything from not just geologists and engineers, but you have biologists and sociologists and political scientists and climate scientists. So all those science and skills are needed in the mine. And I think the other thing that, which just to add to that point, which is really important and which we focus on as well, is we've got a commitment in terms of livelihoods that we need to look beyond mining. Mining has a limited life, right? It's 20, 30, 50 years, but then eventually you have mined it out. So we have a commitment to supporting non-mining related jobs in addition to creating the talent pool to make sure that there is a future post-mining, and that obviously has to be based on the context where you're operating and what can, sort of outlive mining in the future.
I just was going to ask you very briefly, Miki, about Greenland's specifics, the fact that it has a strong system of self-governance. To what extent does that empower the Inuit communities, not just to be consulted and heard, but to actually take part in making decisions that truly benefit them outside of any political pressures?
I think the last month, I can only speak to myself. I'm not a part of the government or anything, but I want to give a big shout out to our diplomacy that have done a really, really good job the last month, tried to de-escalate the situation that we were in. But one thing that would worry me in the future is that the last month we have seen delegation travel back and forth between Washington and Copenhagen, and what do they say in Brussels. But Greenland has its own parliament. Greenland has its own government. And I think that could be potentially a problem in the future, that the big decisions is not taken in the Arctic. But big decisions about Arctic will be taken outside of the Arctic.
Taken outside of the Arctic, the external actors, I mean, how much can they contribute positively to what is going on? Because we were talking this morning about the need to build the infrastructure. So again, back to the Chinese. Could they actually be a positive force in that sense? And I ask you this specifically as a Canadian, keeping in mind what Prime Minister Mark Carney has recently stated, and the fact that he's, about a new world order, and the fact that, the world, part of the world may have to stop looking toward the United States so almost exclusively, but maybe pivot more toward Asia. And we saw the trip he made to Beijing. Could that sort of pivot east also be reflected in the policies that we see in the Arctic?
So wonderfully, from a Canadian standpoint, if we pivot east, we look to our dear friends in Kalashit Nunat, which is great, right? So I think the New World Order argument, where I see that as opening opportunities, is actually with the Nordic countries. It's other like-minded countries. It's not an or equation. We look around us in Canada. We have our friends in Alaska to the west. We have our friends in the lower 48, south of us. We are not interested in becoming the 51st or 52nd, right? That is clear. But we're strong as partners. And that is our destiny. We're destined by geography, history, commerce, those flows. Our desire is to get back to an end state that is the natural one and the normal one, free of this bombast and craziness coming out of the Trump administration. Call a spade a spade. That's been the most disruptive force in the Arctic over the last year. So when I look to it, it's not a pivot away from the United States in a sense of we're now going to turn to China. After Prime Minister Carney did visit Beijing, it was a sectoral agreement on some sensitive areas relating to canola and electric vehicles. Trump's first Truth Social tweet, or whatever it is, whatever he does in the morning at 4 a.m., right, comes out and says, great, I would have gone and made a similar deal. It's only a week later, after things filter through the bizarre mega ecosystem, that we then have threats of 100% tariffs because Canada is negotiating a free trade agreement. No, we're not. In essence, it's more about diversification. I think it's a wake-up call to suggest that perhaps we were being too complacent. We enjoyed tremendous prosperity. 25 years ago, going back, would I have advised Canadian leaders to not have pursued the path that we did? None of us, who is being honest, foresaw the shock that has come in the last year and a bit, never mind in the last 3.5 to 4 weeks. So now I think we look forward, we realize there are other relationships, other constellations. It does not mean wanting the U.S. to be out of our equation. It's to suggest that there are other relationships that I think if we manage them well, and as middle powers and smaller powers, we can do this together. I think that was what Prime Minister Carney was calling for, is to say, look to one another as well. And those don't mean that we all jettison the United States as our cornerstone security partner or primary trading partner. I hope that's going to be the future.
No, but
at the
does
same time, we can do
does
more
it mean
together.
that China and potentially other players have become more reliable, more trusted?
Oh, I don't think
partners, if not allies.
Yeah, and
shall we say.
I don't think I could say that with any good conscience at this particular time. It's a fundamentally different world. We're looking at one individual with a small coterie of sycophants, a fancy way of saying people kissing his butt, right, who are sort of pandering right now. And I think the challenge for us all is to sort of cut through it. And as we've heard from a lot of our American friends here over the last couple of days, right, to still aspire to and look towards building a future that we hope is a positive one where this chaos passes.
This too
and
shall
that we're
pass.
not losing, this too shall pass, I love it, right, and that we're not losing, that is our desired end state. Our desired end state is for the U.S. to, again, see actions from the American people to insist that it goes back to being that city on the hill that attracts us to it by the sheer light of its ingenuity and innovation and democracy, not coercion and fear.
All right. Let's take a question from the audience. Joanna, a question asking, given the long-term outlook for mining or development projects, how do you handle fast-paced instability in trade and geopolitics these days? A large customer one day can put a tariff on you the next day, essentially what we're talking about here.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think just wanted to add to that China discussion, and then I'll answer that one. I mean, in Europe, we've woken up a bit late, very late, to this sort of supply chain issues, right? And at the moment, we have the Critical Raw Materials Act and all these things which are trying to increase our own sovereignty in terms of access to minerals, but they take time. And the reality is China absolutely dominates in the battery, in the EV space, and in the rare earths even more so, like absolutely dominates. So it'll take a long time to even become partly self-sufficient in terms of those metals. So I think we need to see China as one of the allies. We need to be friends and keep friends, because if we want to meet our climate change targets in Europe, we absolutely need China. There's no doubt about it. In terms of how we deal with the volatility in the space, look, I said we work in the long term, and we have assets in various parts of geography. So it doesn't necessarily, and we're very high, the first in the value chain, so we mine and then we sell. So it doesn't directly affect us, to be honest, at the moment. It does affect us in terms of mergers and acquisitions and sales and those things, because China does dominate in the investment space, right? So that's where it does affect how we do business.
And it is dominating here on stage as well. So one more China question, Mickey, for you. I mean, given the fact that Greenland is vast, I haven't been, but I understand it's vast, sparsely populated, and faces high infrastructure costs. For young entrepreneurs like yourself, would you be willing to just accept any kind of investment that comes from anywhere, whether it's China or any other nation, perhaps, with the exception of Russia?
Maybe half a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, but now we have to think twice. But what we seek is like-minded cultures, like-minded people that wants to invest. We have a close collaboration with Alaska already. We had a delegation come visiting us, and we're trying to collaborate on doing some tourist investments, tourism development investments in my part of the country, and we're still super positive about that. But we have to think twice.
I want to get your final thoughts before we end this part of the session about the future, what you think needs to happen, what do you wish more of when you look at investment in Greenland and innovation?
I think what matters the most is that we can have this welfare that we have. What matters the most is my kids having a good life, and my mother is having a good life. I hope that I see a future where there is a meaningful life, creative opportunities, and a place that you want to grow up, and a place you want to be old in.
Yeah, call home and feel, comfortable in for the future, for future generations, not just this one. So Joanna, your final thoughts. I'll weave them in with a question from the audience. Does Anglo-American give local ownership to its mine in the Arctic?
Okay, so the mine that we're developing in the Arctic, it's not a mine yet, it's a project in northern Finland. So, like I said, we actually have commitments around local accountability and collaborating with local in terms of developing the mine, and that's in progress at the moment. So we have an agreement with the municipality in terms of collaborative development of not just the mining, but also obviously when you need mining, you need infrastructure, services, housing, etc.
So the question here is about local ownership.
So that's not something that we've discussed. It's not something that's been raised either from the local context. But,
should it be?
Well, I mean, of the mine, yeah, maybe it's something we need to talk about. But yeah, no, we haven't discussed that.
All right. If there's one thing that you want to take forward within your company, within the mining industry, what would it be?
Look, I mean, we need to also look in the mirror as a mining industry. We have a legacy. We need to do things right if we want to. And we're absolutely fundamental for the energy transition and for society. Mm-hmm. But I think it needs to be done right and in collaboration and responsibly going forward.
Whitney, your final thoughts?
So maybe a weird segue, but hopefully sort of transcends the various big picture sessions and other sessions that we've heard. So we often hear the line that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. In this case, I'm going to say to you, what happens in the Nordic Arctic, I hope doesn't stay in the Nordic Arctic and goes beyond. We've heard amazing presentations on total defense, comprehensive security, whole of society approaches. One of the things that as a Canadian, as a North American, I look at with marvel and an incredible feeling of inspiration is how you have integrated municipalities, but especially the private sector, in your approaches to building resilience. So each of us now as member states of NATO, from the 7 like-minded Arctic states, right? We all sign on and guarantee that there are certain baseline requirements for resilience that we are going to have individually and collectively. So I'm asking you as representatives of Nordic countries in the audience, please share. Continue to refine the tools. Yes, everybody points to Finland. You're doing it in Sweden. You're doing it in Norway. You're doing it in the Kingdom of Denmark. You've got lots of incredible things that I hope to inspire collective action and for us to go and based upon what you're doing, figure out how that can be articulated and implemented nationally, because we are looking now at a security space, like we're all hearing, that's not just military, right? It's much broader, and we're looking at the nature of threats to the safety of our societies, to our right to have democratic debates and protect that space. It requires all the instruments of national power. And when I'm looking here, I'm hearing a reminder just how central the private sector is to all of that. So please share. We're listening and we're watching and we're ready to learn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Whitney. Thanks, Joanna. Thank you, Mickey. And so as you regain your seats, I will invite onto the stage our next set of panelists. Please welcome Håkon Haugli. I just wanted to get it right. Håkon Haugli, who is CEO of Innovation Norway. Ben Mallet, President of the Alaska Federation of Natives. Michael McNair, President and CEO of Arctic Economic Development Corporation. Welcome. And before we begin our discussion, and in this round we do want to look more closely at how companies can work with local communities to build resilient Arctic economies that respect nature, indigenous rights, and so on. So we'll be focusing on what meaningful partnership actually looks like in practice. But first, it'd be great if we could just listen to what emerging Arctic leaders think about all of this. What is their take on this moment, on the economic opportunities that exist?
Every Arctic nation needs to invest in the Arctic.
That investment needs to grow, and we need strong local businesses, accessible healthcare, and inclusive education.
Sustainable development across these sectors and across generations requires continuous investment.
Investment in the Arctic benefits people beyond the Arctic.
It is central to the green transition, national and international security, and global resource economies.
Unique and globally connected local cultures are central to any successful investment strategy.
However, investments failing to deliver long-term local returns have created a breach of trust.
The ebbs and flows of capital have left some communities behind.
Too much investment focuses on knowledge and resource extraction without capacity building. Resilient local cultures are the foundation of a sustainable national economy.
If investment is to be meaningful, sustained, it must come with local trust and capacity building.
There is no strong economy without the well-being of people, culture, and the planet.
Given these challenges, we see two possible futures for Arctic economies.
Local people overlooked, forgotten in the wake of a weakened global economy.
Or vibrant and resilient local economies contributing to the national GDP and world economy.
Which future will your investments build?
An easy choice on paper. Do we want to build future investments where local people are being overlooked or where they contribute to creating these vibrant economies? We heard about the breach of trust. Some communities feel like they are being left behind. We also heard that investment must come with local trust and input. Of course, sustainable development requires continued investment. The need to focus on human development and well-being as well. So to you first, Håkon, having listened to all of this, how does it resonate for you as CEO of Innovation Norway and as a former parliamentarian sitting where you are at this intersection between policy and business?
Well, I think it's much better to be the subject of interest and then manage risk than not be the subject of interest and have no risk to manage. And by saying that, I mean it is an advantage for the Arctic that the interest is great. But yes, there are risks to be managed, and sustainability and involvement, I think, are key factors. And I completely understand the concerns expressed by the young people in the video. However, I want to point out something else, and that's the innovation hotspot that we're currently in. And that's driven by the people and not by foreign investments primarily. Just to give you a couple of examples, but maybe first on the drivers, we're seeing, I mean, obviously the geopolitical landscape is changing, and also environmental concerns drive innovation, but also technology is driving innovation. And I think, I mean, the reason that this region is vibrant in terms of business is the ability to both use technology and create value out of that, but also continuously develop new technologies. One of the examples that I use is the adaptation or use of facial recognition in fish farming. And let me be clear, it's not the face of the fish that gets recognized, but it's the health of the fish. And it's a combination of these traditional industries and new technology. And of course, the value that's created needs to stay in this region. And I think from a Norwegian perspective, we've been moderately successful in doing that, but of course it needs to be continuously paid attention to it. And so sort of a laissez-faire policy of allowing everything to happen is certainly not the politics of Norway, nor is it a recipe that I think we'd recommend everywhere. But let's not push the brakes so hard that we stop development. That would be harmful for the Arctic.
But is development stopping? Because there are somewhat of conflicting reports. On the one hand, we talk about how much Norway is investing in the Arctic. But on the other hand, you've got recent reports that suggest that Norwegian investment in the Arctic has in fact cooled. Norway has halted oil and gas exploration in the region. So do you agree with those who say that the Arctic, the gold rush that we once saw has now sort of dissipated, that it was exaggerated given the extreme cost and the challenges of operating here?
I mean, Innovation Norway is the official trade and investment promotion organization, and we're certainly not seeing a lack of interest in Norway as a whole or in the Arctic. However, I think gold rush, there was never a gold rush. That's too strong an expression, and yes, there was interest. It never really materialized. So I think it's something, an overstated and overemphasized concern. What we do need to do is to ensure that investors and others looking at the Arctic understand what they're looking at, and that they come here with the right set of expectations and act responsibly when they are here. I mean, for many reasons, I mean, in the video it was pointed out the need to involve the local communities. Of course, that's key, but we also have a very fragmented nature that needs to be taken into account. Sustainability in terms of everything from workers' rights to nature is key. So I think everybody in this room has a role in this, but it's about creating a right set of expectations and being truthful in what we're actually seeing, but also being, I would say, forceful in terms of demanding certain behavior from the people who look at the Arctic as a pure investment opportunity. However, I think there are few of those. I think a lot of actors understand this landscape well, and if we look at sort of output rather than input, if you look at investments as input, if you look at output, the exports from this region that we're in now have had the fastest growth in Norway of any county. And that's primarily seafood, but also things like tourism. You would have met a lot of tourists in the streets of Tromsø, but also other things like minerals and industrial production. So, and output, of course, is what ultimately matters.
Ben Mallet, for you, what matters the most? I mean, you heard some of what the emerging Arctic leaders were talking about, the concerns they've raised. How does it reflect the concerns that you hear in Alaska? And I just should say, everyone probably know, but the Alaska Federation of Native being the principal voice of Native Alaskans on key public policy issues.
Yes.
Did what you hear reflect what you hear on the ground in Alaska? or some of it at least?
You know, going back to the previous panel, ownership matters. AFN, Alaska Natives, is unique going back context. AFN represents the majority Alaska Native community. Our membership includes 196 federally recognized tribes. That's 196 sovereign governments, 156 village corporations, 11 regional corporations, 11 regional tribal nonprofits, or about 180,000 Alaska Natives. What that means is we are the Arctic in Alaska, right? Alaska is Arctic state. It makes it, the U.S. Arctic state. Look at Alaska, the coastline. There's more coastline in Alaska than there is in the United States, and that coastline is our communities, it's our homes. Interior Alaska is also our homes. Alaska is unique where we have Alaska corporations. They actually have subsurface rights and also surface rights. We also have our tribes with sovereign governance, and when I think about these concerns, ownership and being at the table is critical. If not at the table, usually on the table. And so, for example, is for Alaska that really that I want to say here, just for example in context, we have one of the world's largest zinc mines that's actually owned by Alaska Native Resources Corporation, NANA. And I want to recognize one of our leaders here, Marie Green, ran NANA for multiple years, over a decade. And that mine has been a very successful operation, but the social dynamics there are right. It's owned by NANA and parts of Tech. Alaska Native corporations, the way we do our land claims, all their revenue or profits is shared among all the other regional corporations. So about 7% of the profit is shared among all of the other corporations. I think almost $2 billion shared since the mine opened. And so for us, ownership matters because that is a job creator. It brings capacity. One of the best things for our Native corporations is our ability for youth to get scholarships. I got scholarships to go to university. I think half my staff got scholarships to go to university, and that has really expanded our capacity. Also from our tribes capacity has grown so much that if you are in rural Alaska and you go to the clinic, you are actually going to tribal health care. ANTHC, Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, is the second largest employer in Alaska. They have a clinic system, to a referral system, to our own regional hospitals, to our main hospital in Anchorage, which is the highest level trauma center in Alaska. And we run that. Alaska Natives run that health system. So for us, ownership matters.
Ownership matters. To what extent does unity matter? Because the Alaska Federation of Natives is a strong voice, represents all of the Native population, but does not speak with one voice, does it? I mean, you've got people within the community who are for expanded oil and gas mining, others who oppose it. So how do you balance these competing views?
Leadership is collective. Unity is built, is not tested. For AFN, we rely on a system of resolutions, capacity within our organizations, and sometimes AFN, we don't take stance on certain issues. And we let our regions take care, speak for themselves. And Alaska is unique where, we have 229 tribes, 196 members of AFN. In the US, that allows for them to have their own unique relationship with the federal government. And so for organizations like AFN, I don't need to take a position on something, but I can open the door. And that's where AFN is really amazing, because we're a convener of different voices. We convene the entire Alaska Native population at one time, usually, every year at our annual convention. Have over 7,000 participants, 1,200 delegates at our convention. And really, in times where we don't have unity, convening's our best bet. And having the ability for us to convene like that is an amazing gift that our ancestors gave to us.
Let me turn to you, Michael. You lead the Arctic Economic Development Corporation, an investment firm operating in Canada's north that also works quite closely with the Inuit communities. How are these economic development projects that offer all kinds of promises, jobs and growth, how are they actually benefiting the local communities?
Yeah, well, and I think one thing I'd want to bring to the conversation about economic development in the Arctic of the North is I do think we should feel a sense of urgency. I do. I do think that the geopolitical threats are real, and I think this is a trend that is not going to shift. We knew about the Russian threat before. The threat referencing Greenland or Canada as the 51st state is new and disturbing, but I do think reflects geopolitical forces that are going to be persistent. And in Canada's north, it is particularly urgent because we have work to do to assert our sovereignty. And there's two ways that you do that. One is through economic development that benefits those who live in the north, and that is primarily Inuit and in the Western Arctic First Nations as well. But it also includes forward defense posture, which the fastest way to do that is through dual-use infrastructure that fully includes the participation of Northerners in their development. And I'm a Southerner. I live in Southern Canada. We have members of our team that are from the north, and we partner with Northerners and Inuit organizations. But one thing that the South needs to listen and learn from the north is they have a pretty good starting point about what the right things to do are. And so in the case of Canada, one of our significant risks is the Canadian Northwest Passage. And securing it as Canadian, making sure that we have spill response, making sure we have thriving economic communities, making sure we have icebreakers, making sure we have active ports. And the Inuit know this. They've known this for decades. Climate change, people bring, a friend of mine once said to me that they bring theology to that. It's physics, and it's underway. And so the Inuit have put forward to Southerners in Canada, these are the two ports, Grays Bay Port in the west and Kikatar-Juarg Port, Kik Port in the east. These are the two gateways to the Northwest Passage. Let's get started, let's build these two ports as a priority. This came from the north. And so the South is starting to catch up to the urgency, given all the threats that are live to us. But full participation of the Inuit helps things go faster is the simplest version. So these two examples are also ports that are Inuit-led. My company is involved as the junior partner at the invitation of the Kikitani Inuit in the development of the Kikatar-Juarg Port, which is led by them, which equity majority led by them. And as a result of that, it's going to go faster, and it's going to lead to capacity building, and it's going to be successful.
Well, you say it's going to go faster, and it's going to lead to all these wonderful things, and I will just call it as KIK.
Yeah.
I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce the whole name. The KIK Deep Sea Port, right, which you reference, a major project by your company and the Inuit Association. Now, a lot of critics are saying, yes, it's all very well and good. You have so many sort of lofty aims and goals for this, but at the end of the day, this project will end up prioritizing corporate and national interests over local needs.
Well,
it's hard to dispute that.
Well, it is easy to dispute it if it's actually led by the local Inuit, and they're the majority owners of the project, which they are. And so that's how you do it right to avoid those kind of concerns, which are totally valid, by having majority Inuit leadership and participation of the project, which this project is an example of.
How much do they drive the decision making?
So, they are the leaders. They're fully in charge. They're in charge of the board. The CEO of the Kikitala Corporation is the boss of the project. And the dividends that we'll get from that is, in addition to the economic and financial returns for the Kikitani Inuit, is that it also means that the operations of the port, it's going to be focused on local communities and employees. The Kikatar-Juarg Port on the ground is impatient for this port. They've been calling for it for over 20 years. And so I think we have a success story in terms of how a project comes together, because of, I think it addresses some of what we heard on the video earlier in terms of how do you do this right, and also from my fellow panelists.
And is there anything specific that you heard from the video that really spoke to you?
I think that there was, and I saw some members of the video in the audience as it was playing, I think that the focus on capacity building and not short-termism in the approach. I get asked sometimes as we look at the construction plans for the port on the eastern Kik Port, of the eastern gate of the Northwest Passage, what's the Inuit participation in the construction, of which of course we would use Inuit firms and northern supply, but the real prize is port operations and making sure we build the training and the curriculum and the program so that this port is operated by the Inuit as well. That's the real high quality jobs, good paying jobs that are a dividend.
Haakon, let me
add to that ownership part. When Alaska AFN passed the Alaska Claim Settlement Act, my father told me one of the things they had to do in Congress was to actually prove that Alaska Natives had capacity to be American citizens. And they actually brought 2 pilots back who had jobs and actually mortgages. So to show that we were citizens of the United States, we had to have a massive amount of debt by owning a house. And so now we look at back then when the organizations were set up, Alaska Native corporations, it's over $27 billion of economy. That money goes back to our communities. The boards are all Alaska Native boards. It goes back to scholarships, it goes back to dividends that goes into our communities. For our tribes, it goes to donations for healthcare, which is mainly ISS government funded, but we run our system too. That's government, we actually took the compacts over. So, when ownership matters, like here, like when you actually have the ownership, the money stays in the community, and that's critical, and it works, and we've seen it work in Alaska. There's a lot of, it takes a while to get there. Like it takes years to get there, and there will be mistakes, but you learn from those mistakes.
Hukun,
yes.
Do you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I think a key question that we're sort of circling around is how can we keep the Arctic open for business, but in a way that it's done responsibly and inclusive. And one topic that we haven't touched on is the role of government, both local government, regional government, of course, national governments. And just to point out something that's probably obvious, but the governments also have some things in their toolbox that need to be applied into this context. I mean, first of all, public procurement is a really important driver of innovation. Secondly, there's regulation. Things can be regulated. For instance, environmental protection is key, and there are regulations that can be put in place. And finally, agencies such as ours can provide risk alleviation for innovation projects. So in sum, the government also is a part of this equation on how to keep it open. And let me just briefly also mention public-private partnerships as an instrument that at our best in Norway, we've done well with. Many of you will know that we are a world leader when it comes to electric transportation on land, but also at sea. Both are examples of a mix of these government tools, public procurers demanding certain requirements, such as non-emission ships, but also regulation in terms of requiring certain ferry distances to be emission-free. And then finally, working on how can we provide risk alleviation. And just to give you a practical example, nobody puts an electric ship on water unless there is a charging station on land. But nobody builds that charging station on land unless there's a customer on water. So how can the government step in, provide risk alleviation to private actors so that they make those investments at the same time and make that system innovation happen? So there are tools that we can apply from a government perspective that will address this need. And also, I think the requirement, for instance, when it comes to environmental protection is there. But of course, also there is the authority to act on lack of fulfillment of those requirements.
But just briefly on that note, is economic development too often pursued at the expense of environmental protection?
I don't think so. I mean, in general, there is this risk, but it has to be managed. And the requirements have continuously changed. I mean, the way business is conducted now is fundamentally different from how it was conducted 50 years ago. 50 years ago, I think we would all say it was done irresponsibly from an environmental point of view. And obviously, we need to take further steps, but I think we are in a good place. I think the awareness now is much greater. And yes, still things are undone, but I think it would be too general and too harsh a statement to say that business is pursued at the expense of the environment in general.
Okay. It's a question to you, Ben, from the audience. Could you please speak to ways in which collaborators from the European Arctic could collaborate directly with North American indigenous governments rather than through the US federal government?
Sorry. That's a great question. A tribal government is a sovereign government, right? Alaska Native Corporation is a private corporation that's owned by Native peoples. It's, Congress created Alaska Native corporations, but I think for that, you don't need a license or permission to go to U.S. government to come talk to us. One of our regional corporations, Alaska, I think owns a couple of fish companies here in Norway and in England too. So our corporations are everywhere, and our tribes, just through Alaska, we have an ability to compact. It means we also don't, it's not a contract, we actually take the service over from the government, we compact that, and we make it our own. And so for our health system, for our housing, we do that ourselves. I say that it's very rosy, but the need in Alaska is, like Canada, is great. Infrastructure is still lacking, and can go back to one of the points, for Alaska, for AFN, we do have a good relationship with the U.S. military and recognize that a busy Arctic is a safe Arctic. And that also means dual infrastructure. And so we are looking at opportunities where we can actually build a dual infrastructures for our own economic development, also security as well. And we did a program through our organization AFN and listened to all of our different communities and looking at some very fun Trump executive orders of what that means. Our communities weren't opposed to economic or resource development. We weren't ready. We don't have the housing in our communities to actually have another economy come in. We don't have the barge landings or the runways. But that's what worried the communities most, is that we weren't ready for it infrastructure-wise.
Yeah, it just struck me that I should have answered your previous question differently. Yes, business can represent a threat to the environment, but certainly business is also key to coming up with the solutions that are required to meet those threats. Everything from climate surveillance to climate adaptation, but of course also the long-term solutions such as zero-emission transportation solutions. So business obviously is a lot of different things, and again it goes back to doing it responsibly, requiring certain behaviors, and we are getting a lot of help at the moment from EU regulations requiring new standards, for instance, and I think the Nordics, including Canada, is well positioned to do this.
Making sure it's not business as usual.
Exactly.
Michael McNair, to you, a question from the audience. Is money the main currency of investment here, or is it power? Because we keep talking about investment as if it only means money. If investment isn't only financial, what does meaningful investment look like in practice? Shared decision-making, data sovereignty, long-term agreements, local authority? You pick.
Well, what a rich question. I guess I'd say a few things. One is, like, money is simply the means by which an outcome is derived from, for sure, and whether it's prosperity, better quality of life, health outcomes, or in the case of a country that's making investments, strength and sense of security and sovereignty for its entirety. I would say that the challenge that exists right now in the Arctic, certainly the Canadian Arctic, is and you heard Natan Obed talk about it a bit this morning, in terms of the gap that exists on infrastructure. That is not simply maritime infrastructure. It is also healthcare. It is also housing. It is those fundamental building blocks of existence and a well-lived life. But it's simplistic to say it's one or the other, because the truth is that they enable each other. And what we focus on at our firm is, in particular, the core basics, almost boring infrastructure, the logistics infrastructure that enables people to live a wonderful, happy, fulfilled life. That means being able to get your food more often, or your goods that are supplied more quickly. Paved runways, not gravel runways, so that you have more tourists that are able to service the local outfitter that works there. It means a deep-sea fishing port that can take in a fishing catch so it doesn't have to go all the way to Greenland. It means all these different things. So I think the question's, it's well taken, and that it means it's asking, are there other implications to the deployment of capital in the Arctic? Absolutely, and it's always worth asking that question. But make no mistake, there needs to be much more capital deployed in the Arctic. And there are pools of capital, and I think the biggest barrier is, I think, the lack of, of projects coming together through partnership with Inuit, through government policy intention, and commercial interests working together. Because when you have all those things at the table, things can go quickly. And so sometimes one is trying to operate with the other, and then it paralyzes the injection of capital, which can lead to those outcomes that I think the question is asking about.
Ben, a question from the audience for you. Ownership matters, we were saying earlier, but who supports or protects these mines in Alaska from global cutthroat competitive markets where Chinese investments create cheaper and more competitive mines?
That's a good question. Each region is different. Red Dog's a really good example of a mine that has social dynamics. Leadership matters. Another mine example is the Pebble Mine, would have been one of the world's largest gold copper mines in Bristol Bay. It was on, the ownership was a little different. It wasn't on native land. It went over native lands. But the Bristol Bay region is home to one of the largest fish runs in the world. And so it was actually the region corporations and the tribes and region corporations, worked really hard to stop that mine. And that was local leadership. While, the tribes and the fish corporations near the mine, spur of the mine, the region, spoke up, and that mine has, slowly been prospects have almost died. Another mine, Stauning Gold, is owned by Statista. That's kind of going through its process right now, but one of the things about that mine is that the leadership is actually it's owned by Statista Corporation for the YK regional corporation, and just seeing how Statista has to work with its communities is a lot different from another non-native owned mine would have to be. So ownership matters. Ultimately, it is our lands, it's our homelands. When I go look at the Yaktat, my family's been there for 10,000 plus years. So it's our leadership that matters. In a village corporation or a tribe, the board is voted by shareholders, not by the community. Is voted by who are saying people. As a tribe, council is elected by the tribal citizens. And so the accountability of these organizations and our tribes and our corporations is actually within the community and ourselves.
Håkon, bringing it back to one of the crucial elements here, the human capital. As a former politician yourself, we know the Arctic holds rich natural resources, but do we have not just the right, you mentioned leadership, do we have the right leadership? And do we have the right vision and frameworks to make the North attractive, not just for companies, but for people to live and stay here?
I think we have the potential to collaborate more effectively than we do. So yes and no. Yes, there is, I think, a strong sense that the Arctic and the world's eyes are fixed on the Arctic at the moment with a good and bad frame. And yes, that provides some opportunities. And but do we act as one region? Well, certainly not. So I think we need to continue these kind of conversations and also obviously challenge politicians to find ways to deal with the opportunities and challenges. And to your comment on people, and fundamentally this is about people living good lives. And in order to do that, we need to both develop the people who already live in this part of the world, but also attract talent and competence from other parts of the world. And so, yes, we've talked a lot about investments. Obviously, that's key, but people are really key. And in order to do that, we need we need jobs that are interesting, and we need that people get their fundamental needs met. And there is a need to step up on that. We need to seize the opportunities that are there. There is not a lack of opportunities in the Arctic, but we need to translate those into these attractive jobs and make it attractive to move to the Arctic.
So just before we wrap up, to both of you, Michael and Ben, how do we do that? I'm going to keep it simple. It's the end of the day, but yeah.
Geez, okay.
How do we turn these political sort of promises and statements into reality? What needs to happen?
Trust relationships matter. In northern communities, indigenous communities, native communities, relationship matters the most. You got to show up. And you got to show up correct. You can't just come in waving money around, because that's not how our communities work. When you look at developing the Arctic, capacity is one of our biggest barriers, and we are Native peoples. We're going to stay on our lands no matter what. And for us, that is built on knowing who the partners are, trusting them, that they're not, going to go back in the world, that they're going to protect our subsistence, they're going to protect our communities and give our children and grandchildren, after that, generations of capacity building an economic future. And that is, you just can't come and say that on a one-pager. That takes time to build that trust and relationship.
Michael, how do you build that trust? How do you ensure that local communities are real partners, real beneficiaries, not just bystanders?
So I think you have to deliver. Trust, there's only so far it goes if all you're doing is talking. In a previous life, I worked in politics. I was policy director for Prime Minister Trudeau for 8 years. And I've seen government move quickly when it needs to. And the COVID-19 pandemic was an example where governments around the world figured out how you can move quickly, but using existing mechanisms that have been set up to be able to go quickly. And I can say in the Canadian Arctic, we have the benefit of treaties with Inuit that protect rights, that enable a dividend for Inuit if those mechanisms are what is used for rapid development. And sometimes that is seen as a barrier. I actually think is an accelerant. And so what I would, I guess if I was giving advice, as I said, I'm happily out of that world now, but I would say that there are mechanisms in place that ensure rapid delivery. And if you want to build trust on the ground, show quick wins, rapid results that lead to outcomes that people can see in real life, that will earn trust and will allow for deeper partnership and deeper results. And we've got to go because it's urgent for all the reasons we've been talking about the last couple of days.
And we almost have to go as well, physically. But before we do, we've got just 1 minute. So to you, Håkon, I forgot what I was going to ask you. So please.
All right. So
I'll be honest.
Floor is
I knew I had a good question in mind, but...
well, let me make a comment then at the end and inject some optimism into this conversation. And I think that's already been there. But, you know, we are in the region where the people are exploring space. We have a launch pad up to outer space, and the deep sea waters of the North Sea are being explored. And that competence, that technology is built on centuries of experience, and that's not going to stop. So I am fundamentally an optimist on behalf of the Arctic. Yes, we need to get our act together. We need to manage risk, and the geopolitical landscape is certainly different than it was 5 days ago and 5 weeks ago. But rich on resources and fantastic talent exploring the deep seas and the space.
I think you've answered it. Lessons learned so we don't make the same mistakes of the past. That's what I was going to ask. But thank you so much to all of our panelists for giving us so much insight and perspective. Thank you. And thank you all for being here.
Har livet vært planlagt for deg? Men nå det opp til deg. Men det fineste av alt, vi går veien sammen.